I am in the midst of making this very conscious choice to let go of the things that are keeping me miserable. The biggest piece of that are the looping stories about my circumstances and how they're shaping my emotional experience. Hey, I'm Hannah, your host of Too Much, Not Enough. After a life-threatening burnout in 2021, I released the brittle version of success that was slowly killing me and built a life that feels as good as it looks. This podcast is for ambitious, soul-led humans ready to stop shrinking and start living big, bold, fully aligned lives. So if you've ever felt like too much and not enough, join me and my guests as we take an unfiltered deep dive into why being the real you was never the problem, and how to create a life your nervous system actually likes. Let's get into it. Today is just you and me, cutie, so settle in, as this one is tender and happening in real time. Recently, Lee sat me down and asked, "Do you even like me? Or do I perhaps just bring out the worst in you?" And it was in that moment that I realized I was unhappy, not with him, but with myself. The truth is, things have been really stressful. I'm less than a year into launching a new business, and I have not been paid since I think March. I'm hiding behind perfecting my website copy when I should be out there selling the shit out of my incredible services. I'm essentially fully self-producing this podcast. I just hired an editor, thank goodness. We're trying to buy a house in Toronto, which anyone who has done that knows our pain. We're also trying to get pregnant. The list goes on. The overwhelm is very real. But here's the thing, regardless of my stressors in life, because there is never any shortage of them at any given moment, I have to choose what version of my life I want to live. Because if I want to stay in the story of being overwhelmed and miserable, I will and have always found a way to get comfortable and stay there for long periods of time. I'm a little bit of a glutton for punishment, should we say? So, this episode is about radical self awareness, taking responsibility for my own emotional experience, and the moment I realized I'm holding myself in suffering. And as I share, perhaps this will also be your wake up call to reclaim your peace, your power, and your ability to choose again, regardless of your situation. Because here's the thing, when we're caught up in these cycles of suffering, of victimhood, of misery keeping, we will always find reasons in our external experience for why things are like that. But what I have learned is that life is always going to life. And if you focus on the shitty things, or if your perspective or your lens with which you look at life is always focused on the negative, then it's going to feel like the negative is never ending. And when we take radical responsibility and choose to shift our perspective and not keep ourselves caught in these cycles of addiction to struggle and stress, that is when things really shift and when you no longer keep yourself in misery. So as I said, I am really going through this in real time. Honestly, I normally sort of process my experiences first before bringing them to the podcast so that I can reflect and look at them with a more fair lens, let's say. Like when you're in the shit, when you're in the middle of it, it can be hard to see things objectively. But I had this moment the other day where I was like, this podcast is about sharing the truth. It is about being real and raw and honest. And what is more raw and honest than sharing with you what I am going through right now in my life? So when I say Lee asked me the other day if I even liked him or if he was bringing out the worst in me, I literally mean like last week he asked me this. And I'm so glad he did, because it kind of shook me out of this weird slumber. And here's the thing, I wasn't unaware of how overwhelmed and miserable I was. I was actually hyper aware of it. And that's what comes with the healing process of becoming more awake and aligned and connected to your truth is that you become much more self-aware in the sense that you can see things happen as they happen. And sometimes you can course correct that before it goes too far. And sometimes you just watch the train barrel down the track, knowing that it is about to self implode and you don't do anything about it. And this is for many reasons, one of which being your nervous system and how it gets stuck in certain states. And in some cases, you can kind of go into a bit of a state of disassociation or flight, freeze, collapse. And it's hard to change your circumstances, even if you're aware of them, or change your approach, I should say, to your circumstances, even if you're aware that it's not working. That's all to say, I was aware that things weren't great. I was aware that I was being more irritable than usual. I was lashing out more when he was asking me questions, that I was prioritizing work and building my business over being present with my loved ones, to the point where like I was making excuses for why I wasn't hanging out with people or doing things that I knew at my core would make me feel better long term, but didn't feel like the thing I wanted to prioritize in the short term. Essentially, it was just like a lot of excuses, a lot of reasoning with myself, a lot of knowing that I was barreling down the wrong path, but refusing to actually make a big change, or a necessary change, I should say. And that was continuing to keep me in this like cycle of staying miserable. So while I was aware of it, it wasn't like super conscious, if that makes sense. And I think that that's an interesting thing to kind of explore, because it's like as you build self-awareness and as you become more in tune with your behaviors and the areas of your life that you're maybe not so happy with how you act and react, that doesn't mean that you're like just going to make the right decisions all the time. You're still human, you're still learning. That's the point of like being here on earth, I guess, is to grow and evolve, and that never stops. It keeps going. You just kind of ascend to different levels of understanding and growing and learning. And so it can still be somewhat unconscious in the sense that you're like doing these things and picking the wrong path, if that makes sense. Let me explain what I mean by that. For me, I was picking the wrong path because I was prioritizing building my business over all the other things in my life that brought me pleasure and joy and peace. That on paper makes perfect sense. I shut down my event planning business at the end of last year. I launched Soma Soma. I am building a personal brand, a coaching brand. I am really going after my big ass fucking dreams, like the ones that didn't even exist 6 months or a year ago, and blowing past things that I did hope for 6 months or a year ago. It is very real what I am in right now. And so on paper, it makes sense that I would prioritize building my business and maybe deprioritize other things. But here's the problem with that. If you are not consciously making that choice with the like real measures of success in your line of sight, then you are going to prioritize for the wrong reasons and therefore prioritize the wrong things, if that makes sense. And so I was just finding myself in this constant state of overwhelm, distraction, and thinking like, I have very much increased my capacity within my nervous system to hold more stress, to be able to not get dysregulated as easily, to be able to meet overwhelm, anger, disappointment in my life and not get completely thrown off course. But there is a moment when we are in stressful scenarios and situations where we begin to choose to keep ourselves there rather than completing the stress cycle and moving on. And there is a deep-seated belief in me, one that I have been consciously working on for many years, that success equals struggle. And while, again, I am hyper aware that that is no longer something that I believe in my bones, that I have to struggle in order to be successful. In fact, I actually think it's the opposite. The things that come more easily to me, the things that flow through me without resistance or tension, are actually where my greatest success lies. That it takes time to completely remove or untangle yourself from a belief that you've held for 3 decades. That in order to be successful, I have to struggle. It has to be challenging. It has to be hard. It has to be kind of miserable. And then I'll know that I'm doing it right. And so all of these really beautiful, amazing things were and are in this moment happening in my life. I am with a partner who I want to build my whole life with, my teammate, someone who I want to do it all with, I want to grow old with, I want to build a family with, I want to build a home with, something that I have never felt in my body before. I have conceptualized it before, but I have never felt it in my body, how much I want to build a life, a partnership, a team with a person. We are in a position where we can look for and purchase a house in the city of Toronto, which is unbelievable and is the culmination of his hard work, my hard work, as well as our parents' hard work and our grandparents' hard work. It all has trickled down, which we are extremely, extremely grateful for. We are, like I said, talking about starting a family. I'm actually actively working on starting a family. Like all these really fucking beautiful things that if you asked me a few years ago, these would be my dream. And they are all happening at the same time for many reasons, but mostly because Lee and I are older and there are certain timeline restrictions that we do have. While I don't subscribe to the once you hit 35, your ovaries are fucked and you're unlikely to have a baby, there are biological timelines that we are playing with here. There's also growth that is happening for us in terms of ourselves, our businesses, and we want to anchor into a home to help with that growth, to help with that expansion. So while I don't know that I would recommend doing all of these things in the same year, that being starting a new business, trying to get pregnant, buying a new house, and all the other things that we've layered in, life happens the way it happens. And sometimes we don't get to choose. And I'm looking at all of these things happening and I'm not present for any of this because I'm so overwhelmed. I'm so stressed. My body doesn't feel safe or able to receive what is happening in my life. And while I'm continuing to practice gratitude around all the things that I receive, I was falling into a very negative loop of like, things aren't happening for me. My business isn't going to grow. I'm not going to get clients. I'm not going to reach the, goals that I want to reach on the timelines that I do, as we're seeing our 20th house and making our second real offer that is not working and we're getting absolutely outbid. I was continuously orienting towards this negative picture of life and was just really at odds with myself in the sense that like I'm building this dream of mine and also totally disappointed and blaming all these external factors for why I'm not enjoying it. And that disconnection has just caused so much discomfort in my system and has, I think, really just led me to like not being able to be present. Because in addition to like all of these things happening, I'm then thinking like, okay, well, if we're going to get pregnant, then I've got a little over, God willing, 9 months to get my business up and running before I go on whatever version of mat leave I decide to go on. So I'm placing that kind of external pressure on myself. As I mentioned, not been properly paid for months, which is the reality of starting a new business. Ask any solopreneur or business owner. Like entrepreneurs are made of a different thing, different cloth. They are cut from a different cloth because like the uncertainty and the instability that you face as an entrepreneur when you're going after like those big ass dreams is wild. The first business I started was like such a safe container compared to what I'm doing now. And so just like all of that instability, which then I'm placing even more pressure on myself, like, okay, we got to make money. If we're going to buy a house, then we've got to be in the right financial position to do it. And if we're going to start a family, then we've got to have this and that. And this is what success looks like. And we are not hitting any of these goalposts right now. Like, what is wrong with us? And then that has resulted in me lashing out at Lee, at other people in my life, whether they know it or not, could be conversations I'm having in my head with them, of being disappointed and frustrated, and therefore placing those disappointments and those milestones that I'm not hitting, those goals that I'm not fulfilling on other people through complaining, through being frustrated when they ask me a question because I don't know the answer and I'm scared. All of these things that are so natural as humans. Like, we lash out when we don't have the answers. We lash out when we don't feel comfortable. We lash out when we don't know how to hold the multitude of emotions that come with being stressed, overwhelmed, disappointed, unclear, unfocused, distracted, so on and so forth. I guess that's to say that, like, part of me unconsciously choosing to stay miserable these past few months has been partly because it feels familiar, partly because it feels justified. Like, look at all the things I have on my plate. Of course, I'm going to be overwhelmed and stressed. Like, I would be inhuman not to be. So I'm allowed to act like this. And while that is true, in the sense that when Lee asked me, like, what's going on essentially, is this something like, really bad that we need to address here? I did say the facts on the table are we are financially unstable. We are trying to buy a house. There's no certainty as to when that will happen. We're in a space that we have outgrown and isn't working for our needs. We are trying to get pregnant. And again, I don't know when that's going to happen. Again, I don't need to relist this for you every time. But what I'm trying to say here is, like, facts on the table are I am so stressed and overwhelmed. And I said that to him. I was like, I'm having an out of body experience because I am so stressed with the uncertainty that is laid before us. There's not a single thing right now that has slotted into place. Like, I was sort of saying to him, like, if the house had been confirmed, then okay, fine. I could probably let my foot off the gas with some other things. Or if I was making money and consistently bringing in a comfortable, monthly income, then okay, maybe it would feel a little less stressful that these other things were uncertain. But to have almost every aspect of your life feel deeply uncertain and untethered is stressful. I am not discounting that. But what I realized in the moment was, like, I get to choose how I react to this stress and how much I allow this stress to impact my everyday, to impact my interactions with my loved ones, to impact how I am measuring my success. And so while it felt familiar and justified, I realized, like, I don't want this kind of familiarity. I don't want to feel this overwhelmed and this stressed. And there are things that I can do. In fact, I am the only one who can make the change to shift my circumstances and get out of this shitty slump, rut, whatever you want to call it, that I have been in. Because I will be so sad when I look back in 5 years and think that was an unbelievable year of growth and risk and going all in on myself and the life that I'm building with my partner. And I just wasn't even awake for it because I was drowning under my own fears about uncertainty and my own need to stay in the struggle. I am in the midst of making this very conscious choice to let go of the things that are keeping me miserable. And the biggest piece of that are the looping stories about my circumstances and how they're shaping my emotional experience. So, to give you an example, what if we never find a house? What if we have to completely change our criteria for the house that we want to buy, which by the way, we have already done. Like our list went from like 10 non-negotiable things to like 3 non-negotiable things. We were like, okay, as long as it has a roof and 2 bathrooms, then we're good. But when you exist in the fear and the what's not going to work out and really measuring yourself against this like major perhaps goal or ideal that like isn't even something that you want. It's just something that you think you want based on external influence. You're constantly going to feel like you're falling short, and therefore it is going to feel like you can't possibly win. And also, more to the point, every time that you actually achieve a goal, you keep moving the target. And so I had these looping stories in my head that each time I got somewhere, I wasn't even noticing what I was accomplishing because I was just already focused on the next thing. So it was like, well, we can't get a house, so I'm failing. Or, I can't firm up a speaking gig, so I'm failing. Or these speaking gigs or networking things that I am doing aren't, moving the needle because I have like created this very specific kind of expectation of what moving the needle is instead of trusting that the things, the opportunities, the circumstances that are coming into my life are all divinely orchestrated to move the needle, as it were, towards the life that I actually want versus the life that I think that I want in the like state of mind I'm in currently. So the biggest thing is for me to get out of these like looping stories that I am hard done by, or it's so unfair that other people have more money and can outbid us on these houses, or that like so and so over there is getting all these gigs booked and why can't I? And like, what's wrong with me? What am I failing at? So on and so forth. And just like looking at the facts of the situation, which is like how far I've come since I launched my business, or the fact that, yeah, we've seen 20 houses, but that means we're 20 houses closer to finding our home, or everything that I have learned about the process of getting a mortgage approval and buying a home that I didn't know about 6 months ago. That's a huge win. It's something that I've actually always wanted to know more about, but until you really go through the process in real time, like you're not going to learn. So look at how much I've learned about that. Look at how much closer I've gotten with my partner in this process and how much we've learned more about each other and about what each other values and what each other wants. Look at how I've gotten more clear on what I actually want out of my business versus what I thought I wanted, or the performative element of running a business. Look how many podcast episodes that I put out. It's so easy for me to look at people who are, 5 to 10 years into their podcast career and they've got hundreds and hundreds, if not close to thousands of podcast episodes. And I'm like, oh God, I only have 12. But actually, I have 12 podcast episodes. And at this point, when this goes out, it'll be way more than that, published. And most people give up at 5 episodes. So I've already doubled, if not tripled that. And I am on track right now to hit 40 or whatever it is by the end of the year. At the beginning of this year, I had 0 episodes. So instead of looking at how much more everyone has, this concept that I have been learning from a book called The Gain and the Gap by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy, recommended to me by Catherine Ducey, which is this unbelievable book, which is everything I needed to hear right now. And the fact that the most successful, high performing, high achieving people in life live in the gain and not the gap. And that means that they measure their progress, their accomplishments, their success by looking backwards at how far they've come rather than looking forward at the ideal that they have created, this ideal goal, scenario, milestone that will mean that they are successful. Because here's the problem with the ideal. The problem with the ideal is that you will always move that target. The ideal is the ideal because it is not meant to be reached. And they talk about this in the book, but it's the idea of the horizon. When you see the horizon, you can walk towards it. You're never going to meet the horizon. It is always going to move. It's an illusion. So if you measure your success by meeting your ideals, which keep moving and changing as you grow, as they should, because it should be these new kind of goalposts that you're working towards, you're never going to feel successful. Instead, if you are measuring things by how far you've come and your own internal definition of success, not the external definition that has been placed on us through school and through work and through social media, but your own internal definition of success, then you are going to feel much more successful and therefore be able to stay in that gain and keep your momentum and keep moving towards what you want. And basically, I've been living in the gap pretty much my whole life, quite honestly, but very much so in the last few months. And Catherine mentioned this concept and this book to me months ago, actually, when she was on the podcast. And it took me this long to start listening to the audio book, but also to really be able to be open to the concept. And I think that I had to learn the lessons that I've learned in the past few months of keeping myself in this state of misery and complaining and lashing out in order to be like, this is just not what I want anymore. I am not building a life. I am not building a business and putting all the hard work that is required in order to do that, in order to not enjoy life. Something is very wrong if that is what is happening, and something is extremely wrong if my partner is coming to me and saying, do you even like me, or do I bring out the worst in you? Because he doesn't. He motivates me, inspires me to be better. But I was taking him for granted and kind of using him, unfortunately, as my punching bag to put all of the big feelings that I didn't want to process or couldn't process because I was in such a state of stress, overwhelm, and attachment to that stress and overwhelm. And so a huge part of this has been about taking radical responsibility for where I'm at and why I'm so miserable and how I've been keeping myself there. And part of that has been looking at victimhood, which is this idea that life is happening to you rather than for you. And that, in fact, life is always conspiring for my greater good. I know the universe always has my back. And that even though I can't necessarily see it in the moment, like when I book a speaking gig and it gets canceled for whatever reason, that feels so shitty in the moment. But there is a bigger, greater reason for that. And if I can trust that the universe is always there to help my greatest good, that life is happening for me, even if that's like a hard lesson that I have to learn, then that is part of me taking radical responsibility for the circumstances in my life and for what is happening to me right now, or happening around me right now, I should say. And that actually feels so much better. Like, it feels so much better to take that radical responsibility. It becomes this like gateway to freedom of like, I'm not blaming my external circumstances. In fact, they don't have the hold over me in order to create a miserable life, because everything outside of me is always going to be changing, shifting, moving. I will always, if I look at life with a negative lens, be able to find the negative, find the things to blame. There's no shortage of that. If that's what you want to do, you will find it anywhere and everywhere around you. But I promise you, if you choose to take radical responsibility, move out of victimhood, which means blaming all of your external circumstances, which are very real, on why you are the way you are, the way that you're acting the way you are, and you instead choose to look at it differently, and that things are happening for you, and that you can learn from every experience in your life, you will start seeing more of the magic in the world, the more of how everything is converging in your best interest. Even if you think right now that you are in the worst possible circumstances, when you take those negative lenses off and start practicing being in the gain, you will see more of the gain. It's the laws of the universe. More of what you put your attention to is more of what flows through your life. And so that can look like practicing gratitude, I remember when I was in the depths, like the deep, dark depths of depression, and I could not see a positive thing if someone had a gun to my head. My brain was absolutely playing tricks on me. And my therapist got me to do this exercise where every night at dinner, I was living with my parents at the time, and every night at dinner, we sat down, we talked about our days and kind of looked back and reflected like, what went well, what could we have done better, and things like that. And I realize now in retrospect that's a little bit of a like being in the gain exercise. You're looking back and seeing like, what did you accomplish today? What did you do? Rather than how did you fall short of your goals? And so starting simply with gratitude, huge difference. But starting with looking back at what you gained today that you didn't have yesterday, that is going to get you in the practice of being able to see around you all of the ways that your life has momentum and is moving towards what you want. And that is a practice that I am starting to implement right now. And instead of looking at my to-do list and looking at how I came up short, because as an entrepreneur, and this is not exclusive to entrepreneurship, but in my experience as an entrepreneur, my to-do list will never end. I could work 24 hours a day for the next 100 years and my to-do list will never end. It will always have something on it that I could be doing more of. And I have been in such the habit of looking at how I did not complete that list every day, how far I fell short, whether it was by 5 tasks or 8 tasks or 10 tasks, rather than being in the habit of looking back and going, oh, okay, maybe I didn't get all 10 done, which was totally fucking unrealistic anyways, but look at the 3 things I did do to move things towards what I want. Look at the fact that I recorded 2 podcast episodes today. Okay, maybe I didn't also schedule all the content I want to schedule this week, so on and so forth, but 2 episodes closer to whatever it is. And that then builds that sense and that feeling of accomplishment and that feeling that you have agency in your life, that you can look at things about how far you've come rather than how far you have left to go. And so that is something that I'm very actively implementing. And the other thing, which Steph Morris, who was on the podcast a little while back, the episode Reclaiming Your Sensual Self, the reminder that she gave me, especially for women in their femininity who want to be in their sort of divine feminine flow, putting pleasure before the to-do list. And I love doing this because every time I do, I see how easily my life starts to flow. But I am very much someone who can get caught back up in that like hamster wheel of getting shit done, getting the to-do list. Oh, if I just push through this week, then I can enjoy and engage in pleasure next week. But no, I just need to get this list done and then I can take a break and really focus on my joy. No, you will never find time for the break if you get caught up in that hamster wheel. And so putting pleasure before the to-do list is something that I'm really, really trying to focus on. So that's micro moments in the morning. That's maybe doing a meditation before getting down to work. That is staying in bed and enjoying my morning with Lee instead of springing up into action and doing things. And sometimes that looks like canceling my workday altogether and simply focusing on things that feel restorative, rejuvenating, and joyful for me. And then the other thing I've done, inspired again by the Gain and the Gap book, or I think it's The Gap and the Gain. I never get it the right way, but basically The Gap and the Gain, or The Gain and the Gap book that I'm listening to right now, has been to define success on my own terms. And that is something that like I talk about all the time, and I have been doing, in the sense of like really thinking about, what does success look like to me, not what do I think I need to be in order to look successful. And I have really been making the small baby steps that need to happen in order to lead a life that I feel is successful over time. And I really have gotten to that place, which is funny because part of what I've been stressing out about so much recently is the fact that I don't feel successful and I feel so far away from my goals and I don't know how I'm ever going to reach them. But when I actually define what success looks like to me, what I am doing when I am being successful, I realize that like it's kind of the life I'm leading right now. Like, yeah, there are certainly things that I still want to achieve. And would I like my financial security to be in a different place? For sure. But when I looked at almost defining what my future successful state would look like, it allowed me to realize I've achieved that from where I was at 7 years ago, 8 years ago, when I started my first business and was working for myself. I have slowly made changes and taken the steps and the risks that are required to bring myself into the version of success that is the most important to me. And so I'm going to read the list to you that I made about I'm being successful when I have freedom over my schedule. I have spaciousness to retreat and to be spontaneous. I am putting pleasure first and then getting shit done. I feel consistently present with my loved ones. I'm spreading the frequency of my voice, and my financial security does not come from my per hour rate. I've got 6 on the list so far, and I'm generally have got like 4 of those on lock, which is pretty fucking awesome. But before I did the exercise of writing this list, I very much felt there was such a gap between me and what I deemed to be successful. And now, don't get me wrong, I've got a lot of shit that I'm manifesting in my life. I want to have $1 million revenue year. I want to be able to buy a cottage. I want to be able to take my family on a luxury vacation. Like all of these things, I still have these dreams and aspirations, but none of those will actually feel successful if I am not also meeting these things on my list. Because if I'm able to have $1 million year and buy a cottage and take my family on a luxury vacation, but I've lost freedom over my schedule, I can't retreat and rest or be spontaneous because I'm just so jam-packed with shit. If I am only getting shit done and not prioritizing pleasure, if I'm not present with my family and my loved ones, then I'm not going to feel successful no matter how much money is in the bank, no matter how many vacations that I can take my family on. And so this has been a really important part of getting me out of this misery cycle that I was keeping myself in, is redefining what success actually looks like to me. I have so much freedom over my own schedule right now, freedom to set my own schedule, which includes being able to put pleasure first when I actually prioritize that, which looks like being able to be present with my loved ones and my family. It's an active practice that I have to engage in all the time, but I have the ability to do that. So I encourage you, if this is something that feels inspiring, to work on creating your own definition of success. And when you do, you may realize that you're much closer to that than you think. And if you're not, then it's going to give you something to work towards that is actually going to feel good in your body, rather than checking off these external kind of milestones of success that are not going to bring you the satisfaction that working towards your own embodied definition of success will. So taking some time to actually write down, what does it look like if you are being successful? And I encourage you to leave a dollar amount off the table and really look at, like, what does your lifestyle look like? What are you able to do? What do you have time to do? What can you dedicate your time towards? Really thinking about that, I think, will give you motivation and momentum to work towards, but it also may give you a more realistic definition of success that is going to actually increase your quality of life. And I'll leave you with a little bit of a prompt question here. And that is, if I gave myself full permission to feel good right now, not when I get money or a house, or for me, when I get pregnant, or whatever that looks like, getting a partner, so on and so forth, what would I let go of? I'll say that one more time. If I gave myself full permission to feel good right now, not when I reach those milestones, those ideals of success that I have set myself, not when I get the house, get the money, get the baby, get the partner, get the promotion, whatever it is, what would I let go of? So maybe take some time to write that down, journal about it, think about it. And if you want to, send us a DM and tell us, what are the things that you will let go of right now if you give yourself permission to feel good before you've reached the ideal, which by the way is not reachable, of success in your life. Send us a DM at Too Much Not Enough Podcast. We would love, love, love to hear it and cheer you on. And on that note, I am going to love you and leave you here until next time.